designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram at snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. This episode is dedicated to Jewel, Ember, and Ashley and brought to you by Sugar Plums. Tonight, we'll read an adaptation of Alexandre Dumas's The Nutcracker, originally published in 1844. Dumas's version of The Nutcracker was itself adapted from the original, written by E.T.A. Hoffman. However, it was Dumas's adaptation that gave inspiration to the famous Nutcracker ballet composed by Tchaikovsky. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. In a great German city, there was once a highly regarded business executive and his wife called Mr. and Mrs. President Silberhaus, and even their name implied House of Wealth. This couple had a son and a daughter. The 9-year-old son was named Fritz. The girl, aged 7.5, was called Marie. They were two beautiful children, but so different in character and face that you never thought they were brother and sister. Fritz was chubby, boastful, mischievous, stamping his foot at the slightest annoyance, convinced that all the things in this world were created to serve his amusement or suffer his whim. He remained in that conviction until the moment where his father, tired of hearing his constant cries and tears or his stamping, left his office and, raising the index finger of his right hand to the height of his frowning eyebrow, said these words only, "Mr. Fritz." This is when Fritz felt a huge urge to go hide. As for his mother, it goes without saying that whatever height she raised her finger, or even her hand, Fritz paid no attention to her whatsoever. His sister Marie, on the other hand, was a thin and pale child, with long hair, naturally curly, and falling on her little white shoulders, like a radiant spray of gold on an alabaster vase. She was modest, gentle, affable, merciful to all pains, even those of her dolls, obedient to the first glance from Madame President, and never talked back to even her governess, Miss Trudchen. Marie was adored by everyone. Now, December 24th had arrived. You are aware, my friends, that December 24th is Christmas Eve? Now, I will explain one thing to you. You must have heard that every country has its particular customs and ways, right? And the most educated undoubtedly already know that Germany is very famous for its toys, its dolls, and its puppets, of which it sends full shiploads to all the other countries of the world, so that the children of Germany must be the happiest children on earth. Something else particular about Germany is that New Year's Day is December 24th, which is also Christmas Eve. Moreover, the New Year's gifts are given out in a very special way. A large tree is planted in the living room. It is placed in the middle of a table, and on all its branches are hung the toys for children. and what cannot fit on the branches is put on the table. And then we tell the children that it is the good little Jesus who sends them their share of the presents he has received from the 3 wise men. I need not tell you that among the favored children of this city in Germany, that is to say, among those who received the most toys at Christmas anyway, were the children of President Silberhaus. For, besides their father and mother who adored them, they also had a godfather who also adored them, and who they called Godfather Drosselmeyer. I must give you a brief portrait of this illustrious personage, who in his city held a place among as distinguished as that of President Silberhaus. Godfather Drosselmeyer, the doctor, was a tall, lean man, 5 feet 8 inches tall, who held himself very stooped so that, despite his long legs, he could pick up his handkerchief if he fell to the ground without almost bending down. His face was wrinkled like a dried-up crabapple. In place of his right eye was a large black patch. He was perfectly bald, so he would don a strange curly wig, which was ingeniously made of spun glass. Wearing the wig that looked like overgrown grass in a neighbor's lawn everywhere forced him to wear his hat constantly under his arm. Besides, the eye that remained to him was bright and shining. Now, the Godfather Drosselmeyer, being also a doctor, had come to know all the springs of the machine of the human body. With this knowledge, he came to the hobby of crafting out of wood and metal toy men who walked, who saluted, and ladies who danced, who played the harpsichord, the harp, and the viola. Dogs who ran, retrieved, and barked. Birds that flew, that jumped, and that sang. And fish that swam and ate. At last, he had even come to make the dolls and puppets utter a few uncomplicated words, like Papa, Mama, Dada. It is true that to someone beholding his creations, no matter how amazing, one sometimes felt that all this was simply an automatic combination and only a parody of the living masterpieces of the Lord. However, despite all the time and energy into his hobby not yielding the most lifelike results, Godfather Drosselmeyer did not despair. He firmly said that one day he would succeed in making real men, real women, real dogs, real birds, and real fish. It goes without saying that his 2 godchildren, to whom he had promised his first attempts of this kind, awaited this moment with great impatience. It should be understood that when he reached this degree of mechanical science, Godfather Drosselmeyer was also considered precious to his friends. So, a clock broke in President Silberhaus's house, and, despite the care of ordinary watchmakers, its hands ceased to mark the time. Its ticking stopped. Its movement stopped. They sent a message to the Godfather Drosselmeyer, who arrived at full speed immediately, for he was an artist with a love for his art. He had taken himself to the clock on its deathbed, which he opened immediately, removing the mechanism which he placed between his 2 knees. Then, his tongue passing through a corner of his lips, his single eye shining like a gemstone, his glass wig resting on the ground. He drew from his pocket a crowd of small instruments, which he had made himself, and of which only he knew the property of, and chose the most perfect one for the occasion, which he plunged into the interior of the clock, like an acupuncturist. Little Marie could not believe that the poor clock did not suffer from these operations. On the contrary, the clock, as soon as it was placed upright, began to live, beat, and purr more beautifully than ever, which immediately restored the existence of the room it resided in, which seemed to have lost its soul by losing its happy tenant. So, on the evening of this blessed Christmas Eve, at the moment when the twilight was beginning to descend, Fritz and Marie, who, all day long, had not been able to enter the large ceremonial living room, were biding their time in a small corner of the dining room, while Miss Trutchen, their governess, was knitting near the window. She had approached it to collect the last rays of the day because, as was the custom of that solemn day, no artificial light had been brought to them, so that they spoke low as one speaks when one is a little afraid. "My brother," said Marie, "certainly Mamma and Papa take care of our Christmas tree, and are fixing it up, for, since this morning, I have heard a great commotion in the drawing room, where it is forbidden for us to enter." "Yes," said Fritz. "It's been about 10 minutes since I noticed, the way our dog barked, that Godfather Drosselmeyer entered the house." "Oh, wow!" cried Marie, clapping her two little hands against each other. "What will this good godfather bring us tonight? I am sure that it will be some beautiful garden planted with trees, with a beautiful river flowing over a lawn embroidered with flowers, and on this river there will be silver swans with gold necklaces, and a young girl who will bring them marzipan that they will come to eat even in her apron." "First of all," said Fritz, in that doctrinal tone which was peculiar to him, and which his parents took as one of his gravest faults, "you will know, Mademoiselle Marie, that swans do not eat marzipan." "I believe it," said Marie, "but since you are a year and a half older than me, you must know more than I know." Fritz paused, and then he continued, "Well, I think I can say that if Godfather Drosselmeyer brings anything, it will be a fortress, with soldiers to guard it, cannons to defend it, and enemies to attack it, which will make for superb fights." "I don't like battles," said Marie. "If he brings a fortress, as you say it will be, I asked for the wounded, to take care of them." "Well, some of what he brings," said Fritz, "you know won't be for you or me, since under the pretext of these gifts from Godfather Drosselmeyer are real masterpieces, they're taken from us anyway. As soon as he has given them to us, Papa will lock them up at the top of the large glass cabinet where he alone can reach them if he gets on a chair," said Fritz. "Come on," said Marie quickly. "Let's guess what our parents will give us. For me, I confided in Mamma that Mademoiselle Rosé, my doll, has become so clumsy, in spite of the sermons that I constantly preach to her. She is always falling over on her face, and the accidents leave very unpleasant marks, so I don't like to bring her around with me anymore." "I," said Fritz, "did not let Papa ignore that a vigorous chestnut-colored horse would do very well in my stable, just as I begged him to observe that there is no well-organized army without light cavalry." At these words, Miss Trudchen, their governess, judged that the suitable moment had come to involve herself. "Mr. Fritz and Miss Marie," she said, "you know very well that it is the infant Jesus who gives and blesses all these beautiful toys that are brought to you. So do not designate in advance those you want, because he knows better than you yourself which ones can be pleasing for you." "Ah, yes," said Fritz. "Last year, baby Jesus gave me only infantry when it would have been very pleasant for me to have a squadron." "Well, I," said Marie, "have only to thank him, for I only asked for one doll, but I was also given a pretty white dove with pink legs and a beak." In the meantime, the sun finally set, and night had fallen. The children spoke lower and softer, and they kept inching themselves closer to each other. It was as if they felt around them the beating of the wings of their joyful guardian angels. Hearing in the distance a soft and melodious music like that of an organ under the dark arches of a cathedral, playing the Nativity of our Lord. At the same moment, a bright light passed over the wall, and Fritz and Marie understood that it was the infant Jesus who, after placing their toys in the living room, flew on a golden cloud towards other children who were waiting for him with the same impatience as they were. Immediately a bell rang, the door opened with a crash, and such a light burst from the apartment that the children remained dazzled, having only the strength to cry out, "Oh, ah!" Then the president and the president's wife came to the threshold of the door and took Fritz and Marie by the hand. "Come and see, our little darlings," they said. "Come and see what the baby Jesus has just brought you." The children immediately entered the living room, and Miss Trudchen, having placed her knitting on the chair in front of her, followed them. When Fritz and Marie stepped into the living room, they saw the Christmas tree, which seemed to rise out of the big table covered with a white tablecloth. Its branches were fully loaded with sweet golden apples, sugared flowers, and pralines. The whole tree was sparkling in the fire of 100 candles hidden in its foliage. Fritz was so dazzled that he attempted several ballet leaps, while Marie did not even try to hold back 2 big tears of joy which, like liquid pearls, rolled over her sweet face as morning dew does on a springtime rose. When the 2 children saw that the table covered with toys of all kinds, Marie found a doll twice as large as her Mademoiselle Rosé, and a charming little silk dress hanging on a coat hook. Then Fritz discovered, arranged on the table, a squadron dressed in snappy red coats with gold braids and mounted on white horses. At the foot of the same table, he found the chestnut horse he had been dreaming of. He immediately mounted the brilliant steed, which was offered to him fully saddled and bridled. Fritz and the horse galloped 3 or 4 times around the Christmas tree. As he got off the ground, Marie had just baptized her new doll with the name of Claire. In their elation, they only noticed the sound of the doorbell when it rang a second time. The children turned to where the noise came from. Then they saw one thing they hadn't paid attention to at first, drawn as they had been by the shining Christmas tree that held in the middle of the room, that this corner of the living room was divided by a screen, behind which there was a certain noise and a certain music, which proved that something new and unusual was happening in this corner of the room. The children then remembered at the same time that they had not yet seen the doctor, and together they cried out, "Ah, Godfather Drosselmeyer!" At these words, and as if, in fact, he had only waited for this exclamation to make his movement, the screen folded in on itself and revealed not only Godfather Drosselmeyer, but also, in the middle of a green meadow enameled with flowers, a magnificent castle with many mirrored windows on its facade and 2 beautiful golden towers on its wings. At the same moment, an interior bell was heard. The doors and windows opened, and in the rooms lit by candles half an inch high, little gentlemen and ladies were seen walking. The gentlemen, magnificently dressed in embroidered clothes, jackets, and silk breeches, with a sword by their side and a hat under their arms. The ladies, splendidly dressed in brocade gowns with large baskets, holding fans in their hands, with which they breezed their faces as if they were overwhelmed with heat. In the central living room of this castle, which seemed ablaze because of a crystal chandelier laden with candles, a crowd of children danced to the sound of this ringing, the boys in formal jackets, girls in pretty dresses. At the same time, at the window of an adjoining cabinet, a gentleman made an appearance and then disappeared again, wrapped in a fur coat. Another figure that was clearly the Godfather Drosselmeyer himself, dressed in his yellow frock coat, with his patch on the eye and his glass wig, except he was barely 3 inches high, came out and returned as if to invite passers-by to enter his home. The first moment was for the 2 children all surprise and joy, but after a few minutes of contemplation, Fritz, who was standing with his elbows resting on the table, rose and, pointing to the mechanical marvel, impatiently asked, "But, Godfather Drosselmeyer, why do you always come in and out through the same door? You must be tired of always going in and out of the same place. Here, go that way, and you will return by this way." And Fritz pointed to the doors of the 2 towers with his hand. "Oh, but that cannot be," replied the Godfather Drosselmeyer. Well then, continued Fritz, why don't you go up the stairs so you can look out the window in this beautiful little home, and you can tell that other gentleman to take over opening the door. Impossible, my dear little Fritz, said the doctor again. Well, now I believe the children have danced enough. They must walk while the walkers dance in their turn. This is not reasonable, cried the godfather, who was beginning to get annoyed at how Fritz didn't seem to understand how a mechanical toy worked. Well, said Fritz, I want to go into the castle. Ah, Fritz, said the president, don't be silly, my dear child. You can see that it is impossible for you to enter this castle, since the weather vanes which surmount the highest turrets barely fit your shoulder. Fritz gave in to this reasoning and fell silent, but after another moment, seeing that the gentlemen and ladies were still constantly walking, that the children were still dancing repetitively, that the gentleman in the fur coat appeared and disappeared at equal intervals, and that the miniature Godfather Drosselmeyer did not leave the door he kept opening and closing, Fritz said, in a disillusioned tone, Godfather Drosselmeyer, if all your little figures don't know how to do something other than what they do, and always start doing the same thing again, tomorrow you can take them back, because I don't care very much, and I like better my horse, which runs at my will. Also, my infantry, who maneuver at my command, are better because they can go in whichever direction I want to, and are not locked in any house. All of your poor little fellows are forced to walk as their mechanical tracks tell them, and their springs and gears want them to walk. Then he turned his back on Godfather Drosselmeyer and his castle, rushed towards the table, and lined up his squadron. As for Marie, she had also moved away very slowly, for the regular movement of all the little dolls had seemed monotonous. Only, as she was a charming child, having all the instincts of the heart, she had said nothing, for fear of distressing the Godfather Drosselmeyer. In fact, hardly had Fritz turned his back when, with a sharp air, the Godfather Drosselmeyer said to the president and his wife, Come on, clearly this masterpiece is not made for little children, but for now I'm going to put my castle back in its box. But the president's wife approached him and, making amends for Fritz's rudeness, had the Godfather's masterpiece shown in such great detail to her, had the mechanics explained so specifically, praised his complicated springs so ingeniously, that not only did she manage to erase from the mind of the doctor Fritz's rudeness, but also that the latter drew from the pockets of his yellow frock coat a multitude of little men and women with white eyes and golden feet and hands. Besides the exquisite detail, these little dolls had an excellent smell, since they were made of cinnamon wood. At this moment, Miss Trudchen called Marie to tempt her with another gift that hadn't been opened yet, with her name on it. But Marie, in spite of her usual politeness, did not answer Miss Trudchen. Little Marie was completely preoccupied with a new toy that she had just discovered, and on which is to be the main hero of this story. In fact, while racing around flying his squadrons, Fritz had managed to unfurl the drapery covering a figure leaning on the trunk of the Christmas tree. It was a charming little man who, silent and full of propriety, was waiting for his turn to be seen. There would have been something to say about the height of this charming fellow. His chest, both extremely long and broad, was in contrast to his small, slender legs. His head was so large that it was completely out of proportion with the rest of his body. But if there was any defect in the harmony of his stature, it was redeemed by the excellence of his style of dress, which indicated both a man of education and taste. He wore an ornate purple velvet jacket embroidered with frogs and buttercups. He had matching breeches and the most charming little boots ever seen on the feet of an officer. He did have a rather ugly overcoat and an awful-looking hat on his head. Marie was willing to overlook those flaws because she thought of how they looked just like the style of overcoat and hat that Godfather Drosselmeyer wore, and he was the best godfather a child could wish for. It is understandable that all these reflections of Marie were not made without a thorough examination of the little man whom she had taken in friendship from first sight. The more she examined him, the more Marie felt how much gentleness and kindness there was in his face. His light green eyes, which were modeled a little too flat to the head, expressed only serenity and benevolence to her. The curly white cotton beard, which stretched over his entire chin, suited him particularly well, in that it emphasized the charming smile of his mouth, a little too wide perhaps, but still, it was a happy smile from rosy lips. After having considered it with growing affection for more than 10 minutes, without daring to touch it, the young girl cried, "Oh, tell me, godfather, who owns this dear little fellow who is leaning there against the Christmas tree?" "To nobody in particular, or rather to all of you," replied the president. "Who is that, godfather? I don't understand." "Oh, it will be a household gift," interrupted the president. "He will be responsible for breaking all the nuts you eat and all the nuts Fritz eats." The president carefully picked up the nutcracker from the tree trunk and, lifting up his narrow wooden lever that ran down his backside, he made him, by a very simple game of rocking, open his jaw, which in turn opened his mouth, showing his full set of white, pointed teeth. At her father's invitation, Marie stuffed a nut into the mouth, and, crack, crack, the little fellow broke the nut with such skill that the broken shell fell into 1,000 pieces, and the intact almond remained in Marie's hand. The little girl then understood that the pretty little fellow was a descendant of this ancient and venerated race of the Nutcrackers, whose origin, as old as that of the city they lived in, is lost in the mists of time, and that he continued to exercise the honorable and philanthropic profession of his ancestors. Marie, delighted to have made this discovery, began to jump for joy. Whereupon the president said, "Well, my good little Marie, since you like the Nutcracker so much, although it also belongs to Fritz, it is you who will be particularly responsible for taking care of it. I therefore place him under your protection." And with these words, the president handed the little man to Marie. She took him in her arms and immediately began to make him exercise his profession, while choosing only the smallest nuts, so that he did not have to open his mouth excessively, which only served to put a ridiculous expression to his face. Miss Trudchen approached to enjoy the sight of the little man in her turn, and the Nutcracker had to fulfill its function for her too, which he did graciously and without complaining in the slightest. But while continuing to train his chestnut horse and to maneuver his militia, Fritz had heard the crack, crack, crack. Once it was repeated some 20 times, he raised his head and, turning his wide, questioning eyes towards the group composed of the president, Marie, and Miss Trudchen, and, in his sister's arms, he saw the little man in the wooden coat. The boy dismounted his horse and, without giving himself time to lead the horse back to the stable, he rushed to Marie and let out a joyful burst of laughter inspired by the silly face of the little man opening his big mouth. Fritz grabbed a handful of hazelnuts that the little fellow broke. Unlike his sister, Fritz immediately chose to stuff all the hazelnuts in his mouth at once. Not only that he might choose the largest and hardest hazelnuts to crack, but they all heard the little man go crack. 3 small teeth fell from the gums of the Nutcracker, whose chin, dismantled now, instantly became weak and trembling like that of an old man. "Oh, my poor dear Nutcracker!" cried Marie, snatching the little man from Fritz's hands. "What a fool!" cried Fritz. "The little man wants to be a Nutcracker, but he has a glass jaw, so he clearly does not understand his trade. Give it to me, Marie. He must continue to break more nuts for me, even if he loses the rest of his teeth, and then his chin falls off altogether. Come on." "No, no, no," cried Marie, hugging the little man in her arms. "No, you will no longer have my poor Nutcracker. See how he looks at me unhappily, showing me his poor injured jaw. You have a bad heart, Fritz. You treat your horses harshly, and your toy soldiers, too. I saw it." "I only treat my horses and soldiers harshly when they're not listening to me when I am nice to them," replied Fritz in his most boastful air. "Besides, I'm not preventing you from whipping your dolls, so don't stop me from doing what I need to do. Now, I want the Nutcracker." "Oh, Godfather, help me," cried Marie, wrapping the little man in her arms. "Fritz wants to take the Nutcracker from me." At Marie's cries, all the grown-ups came running. The 2 children explained their reasons. Marie, to keep the Nutcracker safe, and Fritz, to take it back. And, to Marie's astonishment, the Godfather Drosselmeyer, with a smile that seemed fierce to the little girl, agreed with Fritz. Fortunately for the Nutcracker, the president and his wife sided with Marie. "My dear Fritz," said the president, "I have put the Nutcracker under the protection of your sister, and, as far as my little medical knowledge allows me to judge at this moment, I see that the poor unfortunate is badly damaged and in great need of care. I therefore grant full power to Marie, and no one can change my mind." Fritz wanted to insist, but the president raised his index finger to the height of his eyebrows and let out these two words, "Mr. Fritz." We've already seen the influence these two words had on the little boy, so he slipped, softly and without whispering the word, to the side of the table where the soldiers were, who, after having posted their lost sentries and established their outposts, silently retired to their night quarters. During this time, Marie picked up the small teeth of the Nutcracker, which she continued to hold wrapped in her handkerchief, and whose chin she had supported with a pretty white ribbon detached from her silk dress. For his part, the little fellow, very pale and frightened at first, seemed confident in the goodness of his protectress, and gradually reassured himself, feeling himself very gently rocked by her. Then Marie noticed that the Godfather Drosselmeyer was looking mockingly at the maternal care she was giving to the wooden Nutcracker. The Godfather Drosselmeyer laughed out loud, saying, "My dear goddaughter, I don't understand how a pretty little girl like you can be so lovable to that awful little man." Then Marie turned around to face him. The compliment her godfather paid her did not sufficiently compensate her for the unjust attack addressed to her Nutcracker. She turned and said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, you are unfair to my poor little Nutcracker, whom you call an ugly little fellow. I doubt you would look half as good as him, even if you were dressed in matching breeches, jackets, and boots." At these words, Marie's parents laughed, and the doctor's cheeks blushed. Now, there was a large glass cupboard when you entered the president's living room that the children kept their toys in. It was adorned with tiles so brilliant that the toys seemed 10 times more beautiful, arranged on the shelves, than when held in the hands. On the top shelf, which neither Marie nor even Fritz could reach, the masterpieces of the Godfather Drosselmeyer were placed. Immediately below was the picture book shelf. Finally, the last 2 shelves were left to Fritz and Marie, who filled them as they saw fit. Fritz always seized the upper shelf to make it the cantonment of his troops, and Marie reserved the lower shelf for her dolls, their households and their beds. This is what had happened again on Christmas Day. Fritz put his newcomers away on the upper shelf, and Marie, after relegating Mademoiselle Rosé to a corner and had given her new doll, Mademoiselle Claire, her bedroom and bed. It was very late in the evening, about to be midnight, and Godfather Drosselmeyer left a long time earlier. But the children were still playing with their new toys at the toy cabinet.